Welcome back to the Healthy Chicago podcast, where local health professionals and their guests discuss the latest public health issues affecting Chicagoans.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Healthy Chicago. I'm Elvis Ortega with the Community Safety Coordination Center, and today my guest is Sam Castro with the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. Really excited to have you here today. We are looking to really talk a little bit more about and making sure folks are more aware of what CVI really is, or community violence intervention. And so as I was thinking through, who to have on here, you're definitely one of the folks on the top of my list. I'm really excited to have you to talk a little bit more about what that is and who does this work. And so I just real quick, if you want to just do a brief introduction of, again, who you are and what your role at INVC is. Let's start there.
Well, good morning, Elvis, and thank you for having me. It's an honor. So my name is Sam Castro. I'm Director of Strategic Initiative and Partnership at the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. We service Austin, West Garfield, Back of the Yards, and Bryant Park. My role is to help our partners understand what CVI does. One of my roles specific is I do all the trainings for all the new hires that are outreach and street workers, and also for our partners in our collaboration is to make sure that I'm training them and getting them ready for the role of an outreach worker, because it's a thing to have a passion to want to do it, but we want to give them all the tools so they can have the best success out of their career and make the changes of their communities.
Let's go back a little bit. So what is an outreach worker for folks who are not aware of what this work really looks like?
Okay, so one, I have to identify that in our field, many people do outreach, but our target population is the population, the drivers of violence and people most likely to be shot. So an outreach worker is a person who has, has either healed from their traumatic experiences or are in the process of healing. We were once the drivers of violence in the communities, right? So we have the relationships with the grandparents, the parents of these young men who's driving the violence in the community. So we are hyper-local. We are men and some women that have been through the lifestyle of our target population, so we can relate. We're relatable people. We have experienced some of the things that they have experienced. So when we sit down to have conversations with them, they're looking at us like, okay, we can relate because you've been through what I've been through.
And how'd you come through this work? Like, what happened? Like, it's interesting when I talk about CVI, people are always asking, like, well, how'd that happen? How'd you get to do that? And I have my experiences, for me, it's something that I remember thinking to myself, well, I just want to work with young people. And through a variety of experiences, personal and professional, I was able to kind of get into that world of working with young people who, and I myself was the kind of person that was always looking to reach that young person that seemed unreachable for whatever reason. And a lot of times, those were the individuals who fell into that category, as you spoke to, as far as someone who might have, unfortunately, was involved in things that were not always very positive. And so I think my experience was very, almost like, again, trying to figure out where I fit in, because, there wasn't anything that described that work. Like, you don't go to college, for example, and become an outreach worker, right? There's variety, like you said. There's several people that call themselves outreach workers, and it could be like social workers. It could be any number of things. But the unique experience that outreach is in CVI is very different, and how folks get into it, I think, is important that people understand. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about your story, how you came about it, how long you've been doing it now.
I think that the majority of us that do street outreach now, we were in somehow part of that street ecosystem. So we belong to some kind of street group, known as gangs. And sad to say, but we were the ones that kind of helped destroy our city. That's what we believed in. So a lot of us that do the work now, it's kind of like we feel guilty because we're like, man, this is what we have put into the next generations to come. So who better to fix the problem than the closest one to the problems? Because we were the problems.
Right.
So now it's like, wait a minute, we're trying to undo all the damage that we've done in our neighborhoods. So for us, it's more than a job. It's kind of like of a calling. Pastors want to be pastors. Us guys that used to belong to street groups, a lot of us want to do outreach work so we can change the way society is and the way the youth is going now. And also I think about it on a personal note. I have a 19-year-old son who's target population, so he is one of my main things that keeps me driving, that I gotta make a change.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a researcher at Northwestern who talks about the connection between the folks that do the work and the people that they target, right? Like there's this real connection to them. The degrees of separations is very little to nothing, right? Like you, for example, the connections that might keep you personally, maybe your children, but there's also the relationships that you've developed through your own personal experiences. So when you started doing this work, there were already people in place that you already knew who to talk to, so the neighborhoods that you work in, it's not an accident that you work in those neighborhoods, right? So I'm curious to hear about what that experience was when you initially starting doing this work. When you're coming back to your community, and what was the reaction? How did that feel? Things of that nature. Were people like, wait, what, you doing this now? Or were they like, yeah, this makes sense that you're doing this now?
So I think it's both. I had to break away from people to thinking this was this gang member selling drugs. You kind of have to convince the community that I'm not talking to the youth to put them on the wrong track, right? And one of the things that I've learned is that our youth, they smell you. If you're phony, they're going to tell you, like, you got to go. We don't care what you've done. Because one of the things about this generation, they splinter off to so many different groups that I've learned to lead with love and be consistent with them. So at first you get a little bit of pushback. They're thinking this might be just an old-timer from the neighborhood. What is he on? But when they see that your intentions is consistent and you have their best of interests, I haven't met a young man who pushes someone who is trying to be loved on, right? And when they see that, you'll be surprised how much that they open up, because they're like, all right, this guy cares, right? And sometimes it takes traumatic experiences to happen. It could be a friend being shot or killed, and you come and help and support and some groceries, or walk the family through the funeral arrangement. And if it takes that, it's all right, because you got the win. Or it may take just going to court with them, right, and supporting them then. When they see that you care and you call 100 times, they don't answer, but when they call you, you answer all the time, they're like, all right, I can work with this guy.
You've highlighted a couple of things that people, I don't think, are really aware about what like CVI really is and what outreach really does. You talk about like bringing groceries to somebody, you know what I mean? And how, some of the individuals we work with, they just can't go to a grocery store like me and you can, because there might be some physical constraints. There might be some other constraints in the place that make them unsafe. So even that act, something so simple, and understanding that is really important. How do you, when you first initially work with somebody, how do you start evaluating about what are some of the needs I need to, win over now so I could get to the bigger victories? How does that even work? Like, is there a process of like, oh, these are some of the things you need? Is there a check? I'm just curious of like how you start evaluating what are the immediate wins I can get now so I can get to the bigger ones?
Yeah. So you're right. You and I can go to the local grocery stores, but a little bit 2 steps before that, you and I have the money to be able to go, right? And many people don't know that, so they'll take that for granted. A lot of these little guys we working with, they don't know where their next meal. They're couch surfing from an aunt's house to a friend's house. So one, I think about, as I'm speaking to the young man, I think about his physical but also his emotional safety, where he's at. Because trauma is real, and I have to be aware of that. So when I'm going to the neighborhood and I'm talking to the guys, a lot of stuff happens in a group, but when it's a one-on-one basis, when I be like, yo, jump in the car, let's go catch a bite to eat. And you see, because as soon as they get in the car, they'll tell you, I can't go through here, don't take me through there. So for their safety reasons, I'm like, all right, what route should I take?
Right.
And I think when you're talking to them in that one-on-one session, you're having a bite, just asking them what they want to do, right? At least to get some sense, because I'm pretty sure their whole life they've heard, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And I understand that they don't have the answers, right? I'm here to just give them some good suggestion and support them, but really asking them, like, what you want to do, what's next for you, right? Sometimes the response you'll get is like, I don't know nothing else. I know the hood, and then I know it's an opportunity, a window for me to be like, all right, I got some positive stuff for you.
Yeah. One of the things that sticks out, you have a team in the back of the yards that I'm very familiar with their work because of my personal experience in that community. And one of the things they really talk about, I hear Lupus saying this a lot, and Shay saying this a lot too, the folks on your team, who are always like, we're going to get some of the guys and we're going to take them out the neighborhood. We're going to go do something. We're going to, go camping, or we're going to go to a field, some kind of field trip almost. And it's almost like, almost very after school specials, about it. Yeah. But a lot of these kids, and I remember having that experience, right, with my young people that I worked with, and some of the older individuals I worked who've never been to a water park, and it's always so much fun, that initial experience for them when they leave the community, that they're so comfortable, and they're just like, there's a whole other world over here. Talk about how important that is.
Yes, so Back of the Yards is a close neighborhood to my heart. I love them brothers and sisters there. I remember the first time I took a group, maybe of 15 of them, and I went with my wife and my boys. So I'm like, I don't know what to expect. This is going to be crazy. My kids are like, Pops, these guys got tattoos. I'm like, it's all right. These are my guys, right?
Yeah.
So we get there and the line is big.
Yeah.
They're like, Sam, we're cutting to the front. I'm like, no, we don't do that. Right. So they were like, we're going to cut. And I'm like, all right, so wait for me by the gate because I'm not going to cut the line.
Right.
So as they went to walk, I'm like, whistle. I'm like, we're trying something new. Work with me, right? So they gave in. They were like, all right, we'll go. But what I seen was they act like kids.
Yeah.
They enjoyed themselves.
Yeah.
They got on the rides. We had burgers. It was like Back of the Yards didn't exist until we left Six Flags. And as we got closer into the city, then you could see the trauma kicking in.
Yeah.
Like, Sam, watch that car.
Yep.
You shouldn't take this road, right? Yeah. So, yes. And that is important because, as you said, in their life, they live in that box.
Right.
And they do everything in that box.
Right. And that's a big part of this work, is not only that, is like identifying the boxes, right? Like, what are some of the challenges that exist that keep these individuals kind of almost, I hate to use the word locked in, but that's kind of what it feels, right? And they themselves have difficulties expressing, how to get out of it. And so you're constantly creating different opportunities, whether it be a trip outside the neighborhood, whether it be, even getting them some of their primary needs, like going to work and getting a Social Security card or a license or medical attention. I remember doing the work, and I remember I had a gentleman I was working with, and he had a bad toothache. And I was like, well, let's get you to a dentist. Like, let's do this dentist. He'd never been to a dentist, number one, and he was probably in his 20s at this point, early 20s, but he had never been to a dentist. He'd never seen a dentist. And so, in my head, I'm like, oh, there's a dentist down the street. Well, we can't go down the street to that dentist. So being in a little village where there was the dentist, I think there's like 3 now, we had to go to Oak Park because that's where he felt far away from that box that he could be safe and not only that, show some level of like, sense of like, what's that? Feeling like I'm going to allow myself to be helped, vulnerability, because he's over here expressing the pain where he would never do that in another place. In that box, he could never express a simple toothache, and we had to go to Oak Park to do that. I remember thinking, the whole ride back, and under a little bit of medication, and understanding for him was like the first time that he's had some sense of relief. Not only that physical pain, but also there was a little bit of emotional pain, which is being outside of that box. But you're right. When the closer we got back to the neighborhood, that tension, that trauma, comes back up. How does the work not only help, like, and again, I think a big part of this work is addressing several sources of trauma. How does somebody like yourself, like, how do you keep up with the work? Because when you're dealing with people's trauma, that becomes your trauma sometimes. Like, how do you protect your spirit while doing this work?
So one of the things, and we're blessed that at the Institute for Nonviolence, we have clinicians on board.
Yes. Because
we used to lean on each other's, but how good is it if you're not a clinician and I'm not?
Right.
I'm telling you about a shooting I'm dealing with. You're telling me about some kids that got shot, and it's like, plus I bring my own history, right? I've been shot several times, so I'm running back to the fire. So for us, we're intentional about 2 different things. For all our frontline staff doing outreach victim services, we take 30 minutes where we sit down and just have conversation one-on-one with our clinical teams, because we need it. It's a heavy lift, and I can say that I experience it because I'm a proud Latino man, and we just wear it on our shoulders. And I remember one day I was feeling kind of funny. I didn't know what the feeling was, and my wife popped up. She brought me lunch, and when I got in the car, I was just in tears. And she's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but something." But then I went upstairs, and I'm talking to one of the clinicians, and she's like, "Those are just signs that you need to let the stuff go," right? So especially in the summer months, I think about how violent some of our communities are that we're continuously running. So I just needed somebody to talk to and let go of this. So we are intentional at the organization to have these sessions and talk us through, even if it's just hear me out.
I think that's one of the things I'm excited about, the field, right? Like, this is a very growing field, and folks like yourself and me who've kind of seen some of those transitions throughout the year. One of the things that we've been working on together, and also with Tanny Gross, over the executive director over at IMC, is like, how do we professionalize this work even further, right? And in other fields, folks have access to that kind of care, especially traumatic care, right? Any frontline or any first responder, their organizations, that's built in. They understand that, right? And I think it's so important that organizations are starting to see that, and they're mimicking those experiences or those opportunities and those tools for folks like yourself. Because again, I say, I think street outreach workers are very much first responders, because and we know this, that when an incident happens, we drop whatever we're doing. And it's really you guys, because it's the work that your people are doing, are dropping everything they're doing, and they're running to that with no real thought of like, well, what just happened? What am I walking into? You're just using your initial experience and knowledge of the ecosystem you're walking, hopefully not being caught up in that, just wanting to intervene in a way. And so I think it's important that people kind of recognize, this is why we need to care for our professional staff, because this is who they are, right? They can't just do this and just go home and be like, all right, because I had an experience, I can bounce back real quick. I want to talk a little bit about the training that you're doing to prep somebody to do that work, right? How does that work in the first week for you guys? Like, is there a time where these individuals kind of like, kind of shadow other folks, or how's that work?
So we're intentional, the new hires. So one, you have to find people who have the best relationship with our target population. So normally what we do, if we're dealing with some young guys in the neighborhood, they're not ready for a job. But we'll ask them like, hey, do you got an older guy that you guys trust, that you guys love? And they'll be like, such and such. We can work with him.
Yeah.
Because then it's better when somebody is from their neighborhood.
Right.
Because then it's different. I have an LTO, so a license to operate. But sometimes people may borrow me their license so I can get in this community and go do the work. So one is finding the right person that wants to do this, right? That wants to help their people. And then we're intentional to making sure, like, one of the things is that I keep telling my staff is like meeting people where they're at. I expect you not to answer your call. I expect you not to have the same number. I expect you to let me down. Because if you had the answers, I wouldn't exist.
Right.
And I hope that we can work ourselves out of this, that I won't have a job doing this anymore, right?
Right.
So I tell my staff, think about them. You have to have patience.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to be relentless. You got to want to make this change, but also you have to live by example.
Truth. Yeah.
So if they see me at 10 o'clock at night somewhere, I'm going to be the same person if you see me at the office.
Yeah.
I'm that same 10 in the morning, 10 at night.
Yep.
Right? I can't over-relate. I got to draw the sand, the line in the sand. But showing them that, hey, you can make a change because I've made a change.
Right.
And walking them through the process.
I that point is so important, that you have to be that example. You have to mirror those things that you want to see. You want to model those behaviors for them, and it has to be consistent. And that's a challenging thing too, if you think about it, because we have heroes. We all have heroes that fail us, right? In a moment of weakness, they may not be the thing and then we're just like, well, then I don't have to be that. And that's okay when it's just a basketball player who you watch on TV every once in a while. But it's a completely different thing when it's somebody you depend on as a lifeline to say, for me to make my life better, I need to really pay attention to this individual. And because the first time you mess up, that gives them complete free range to go and say, you know what, he can't do it, and he's really strong. How am I ever going to get there? And so the amount of pressure that an outreach worker must feel to stay that course, especially, I always thought about it, the challenging part is that first couple years, because you're just transitioning yourself sometimes, and so I think it's important to, and again, to have the kind of trainings that we are working out, and how we pick the folks that we need, because sometimes they're not ready to do the work. There's a lot of people that want to help people change, but they themselves are still in a transition point that they're not ready for that change. You said something about like how we work with folks, like who, when you have other organizations that want to support what you do, right? And one of the things about this work, it's like, especially in government, and this is important for us to hear, how do we support your work without, overstepping or making things more complicated than they need to be? Because a lot of times when you bring other folks into the circle, it just makes it a lot messier. So how do you go about, training folks and preparing them in a way that will be most effective to support what you do?
I want to answer that, but I have something prior to that. Some people look at vulnerability as a weak point.
Yeah.
I think a man stands up, and when you need and you show your vulnerable side to these guys, they're like, all right, he's human. And I've had situations where my house was burnt, so I couldn't talk to the guys because I was dealing with my own stuff. And then I found out they were mad at me because I couldn't reach out to them within 30-day span.
Yeah.
So I showed up in the neighborhood, and they were like, man, Sam, we haven't seen you. Maybe you was with our adversary. And I was like, no, let me tell you what happened. I'm human too. So long story short, when I told them, they felt bad because I told them, you should be checking on me.
Right.
I reversed the role on them.
Yeah.
And I led and showing my vulnerable side, and they were like, they respected that, and they were like, man, we love you, Sam, we're sorry. So yes, I think about the CVI ecosystem.
Yeah.
Everybody plays a role,
Yeah.
right? We've built a professional understanding with law enforcement. We're working with elected officials, faith-based organizations, pastors, community members. No one can do it on their own.
Yep.
Law enforcement can lock themselves out of that. We are just another part of it, right? So I think, for one, it's for people to understand what we do and the role we play. We don't want to be everything. We want to be good at what we want to do, right? So we just want to, first is, for me, the most important thing is I want to reduce violence in my communities, homicides, right? Shootings. But I also need partners if in one of our areas there's a lot of narcotic sales. So I called Elvis. Elvis, I need Narcan. I got you, Sam. Hey, Elvis, I have this community where some community members are complaining about lights. This, I can call my partners, right? Same thing with law enforcement. If I know there's a funeral of a young man who was killed, and I think there's tensions in the air, I could reach out to the commander and say, hey, I need a police car there, right? And they'll come, and we got you, Sam, no questions asked. Same thing with faith-based. Sometimes if we're passing out food, let us pass out food together. Because then when the young man on the block, the key is, hopefully one day we'll get there, if Mrs. Johnson see the kids on the front porch, instead of calling 911, she'll call an outreach worker, a CVI organization. They'll move, and then we'll bridge that gap between the community members and our target population. But we need everybody. Yeah, we can't do it on our own.
Yeah, and that's important. It's really important. And before we roll out, how does somebody get in contact with the Institute? If I'm a parent or I have of someone that's recently had some trauma, how do I reach out to you? How do I get a hold of you? Where are you located? What communities can I get?
So we're on all social media platforms at Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. We have 3 offices. We have one in Austin, 1856 North LeClaire. We have one in West Garfield, 4401 West Costner, and we share a space with Precious Blood Ministry on 51st and Elizabeth in the back of the yards neighborhood.
Great, thank you. And again, I can't say how much I appreciate your time and all that you do. We've been doing this work together, surprisingly, only 4 years, but I feel like I've known you more than that, right? Like, yes. We've been doing this for a while now. And our careers have kind of also mirrored and stuff. We've been doing this for more than the time that we've known each other. And I will say this, that in this space, you're probably one of the most knowledgeable individuals that I work with, and I think it's been great seeing you kind of develop as I'm developing. So it's been this weird kind of like joint journey we've had. So I just want to say thank you again for all that you've done all the time. Sam is definitely. You've been one of the people that I make a phone call and I'm like, hey, brother, I need to, how do we address this or what's going on here? And that is so helpful for us as government to have those real connections in the community. And we're lucky enough that this has grown to a friendship that I'm very honored to hone and care for. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for being with us today. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvis. Appreciate it.
And that's our show. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to rate and subscribe wherever you find podcasts. I'm Dr. Bora, and we'll see you next time.